Kirby villains, the only villains who lose by getting sucked off.
Video games are some of the best villains in media. Bowser is one of the most iconic villains ever. Andrew Ryan is still surprising players to this day, and even recently, Odin and the gods are one of the most terrifying forces I've ever seen.
But do they really compare well to this rat?
Kirby has been around for so long, and for a seemingly simple series that releases almost yearly, it continues to impress with its villains and storylines. Obviously, the stories don't impress in the same way that a story-focused game would, but they still manage to engage people in simple ways. I mean, an entire community is formed around the lore of Kirby games.
It's like a religion, except way cooler.
So something must be getting done, right? What is leaving such a powerful impression that people would care about a storyline for such a simple-seeming game? Marx and Magalor are both very notable examples of fan favorites. They're very similar as well, with both of them being twist villains from some of the most beloved games in the series. Marx is presented as a character who's just trying to help Kirby summon Galactic Nova to save Popstar. And why would you believe otherwise? It's just a Kirby game. However, Marx is a cunning jester who manages to trick both the sun and the moon into fighting. He then convinces Kirby that the only way to stop them from fighting is to summon Galactic Nova, a being with the ability to grant any one wish. Kirby plans to wish for the fighting above Popstar to stop, but right at the moment he's about to wish it, Marx jumps in and steals the wish for himself. Magalor had a similar plan to Marx. After losing to Landia on his home planet, he retreats to Popstar and plans to present himself as a victim so Kirby will help him. And the player has very little reason to believe otherwise. After all, it's just a Kirby game. So you go along with Magalor's plan and you eventually defeat Landia. But the moment Landia is defeated, Magalor retrieves the Master Crown and puts it on his head. And just like Marx, it all happens so fast. This is the first example of the Kirby series taking advantage of its simplicity to tell more impactful stories. You would never expect Magalor or Marx to turn out to actually be a twist villain in such a simplistic world. And they give you so little time to react to it, so you're forced to take in all the emotions at once.
Like divorce!
So they become insane moments that people remember for the rest of their lives. They're even smart about when they do it. If Kirby games were always trying to make a character seem like a good guy and then turn around in an instant and be a bad guy, we'd be ready for it.
Like Nintendo!
So both of these characters became fan favorites, and Marx was even heavily requested as a character for Smash. This even resulted in him getting added as one of the few bosses in Smash Ultimate. These are some of the stronger examples in the series, so we'll reel it in by talking about some of the simpler guys. Galactic Knight works well as this impossible threat. He's hyped up to be one of the most powerful beings to ever exist. And then a butterfly swallows him. Morpho Knight is absolutely terrifying to see for the first time. With all the hype Galactic Knight always gets, to see him instantly defeated by one of the first things you see in a Kirby game is unbelievable. Vecto Elfless is similar to Marx and Magalor technically, being the evil form of your friend, but I would argue the twist doesn't work as well as the other two, so I didn't include her alongside the others. And her connection to your friend throughout the game is not as much of a betrayal. It's more of a possession like your average Dedede boss fight. So I would argue she still works pretty well. Queen Sectonia is an apt metaphor for where the endless quest for beauty can ultimately lead you to always feeling inadequate. Stardream and Haltman are also good metaphors for what constant technological improvement can do to people and planets.
And the rat is hot.
However, up to this point, we've avoided talking about the common recurring villains in the series, like Dark Matter and Zero. Dark Matter has been a major part of the plot in 5 of the mainline Kirby games. Dark Matter is made of purely negative emotions, the exact antithesis of Kirby, which is exactly the kind of dynamic many great stories have. Pyra and Malos in Xenoblade 2, Kiryu and Ryuji in Yakuza 2, and even one of the most quintessential villain duos, Link and Ganondorf.
And Kirby manages to pull it off just as well in this much more simplistic setting.
We don't fully explore the dynamic because it's a Kirby game, but we don't need to. It just feels right to have Kirby fight the opposite of himself, which is probably why we have to fight him so many times. Then in Kirby's Dream Land 3, we find the source of Dark Matter, Zero. Then in 64, you fight him again in an even more disturbing form. In Amazing Mirror, you fight an alternate universe version of him, Dark Mind, and it appears once again in its most powerful form in Star Allies.
But first, we have to talk about Squidward.
Highness is the first confirmed on-screen appearance of an Ancient, which is a very important race in Kirby lore, but we won't get into that now. And while in the game he seems completely crazy, he actually has a backstory where he saves the 3 mage sisters and nurses them back to health. He teaches them magic and raises them and becomes friends with them, before going insane after being kicked out of his homeland. He eventually completely loses himself, and this results in the form of him that we see in the game. His insanity eventually leads him too far, and he revives Void Termina, the source of dark matter and zero. Void Termina is immediately terrifying, with the epithet Destroyer of Worlds and being absolutely massive. And as the fight progresses, you see him take on the wings of Zero and wield the Master Crown, the very thing that gave Magalor his power. This is easily the most powerful enemy you've ever seen in the Kirby series, but Kirby's the most powerful being to exist. There's nothing he can't beat. But as you enter his soul, you realize that not only are you fighting the source of dark matter, but also a member of Kirby's own race. His roar is even just a slowed down version of Kirby himself. This gives so much more depth to Kirby himself as a character. We can't get into it now, but it's such a great villain for him. However, none of these guys can compare to our final two remaining villains, the King himself and Meta Knight. These two have both been around almost as long as the series. Meta Knight was originally an enemy attempting to disrupt Kirby so he doesn't release Nightmare. However, even as an enemy, he still does the chivalry thing, even if most of the time he's just taking away your cooler abilities. After this, though, he remains a rival to Kirby and a frequent hero to Dreamland. Ultimately, he is just a generic anti-hero archetype, but they were doing it before characters like Shadow the Hedgehog. He may not be super unique, but he still adds an incredibly interesting dynamic with Kirby, especially when you realize he's also a member of Kirby's race.
And he gives every 10-year-old who sees him a new personality trait.
Now, everyone before this is still a very good villain, but it's time for the true perfection of Kirby's villains. King Do, it's Dedede. Initially, King Dedede seems like a Bowser type of villain, just the recurring villain who doesn't do much more, but in every subsequent game, he's shown to be more and more of an amazing character. In Kirby's Adventure, it looks like he's up to his same old shenanigans, but he was actually protecting Dreamland from Nightmare. In only the second game in the series, he's already showing growth and will continue to throughout the rest of the games. He frequently shows how much he cares for his kingdom and Kirby, and by Return to Dreamland, he's directly helping Kirby from the beginning. And just look at this on the title screen. Did you see that? He's making a joke with Kirby, messing with him. This shows that he's just become a friend of Kirby's now. This development across games doesn't need to happen. He could just be another Bowser, but they do it, and it's so great. And finally, in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Kirby has just saved Dedede from his possession, but the beasts are still pursuing them. They have to hurry to the elevator to escape, but as they begin to run, a Waddle Dee, one of Dedede's subjects, trips. He realizes this, so he runs to save them, but the elevator door begins to close. King Dedede, realizing he won't be able to make it back, throws the Waddle Dee into the elevator, whips out his hammer, and prepares to fight until the very last.
Dedede really is the perfect villain. Alongside the rest of the Kirby villain pantheon, it's baffling how well it all works.
They hit so many different types of villains, and while it's all simple, it all works in its simplicity, giving Kirby one of the greatest villain pantheons in any video game.
Who's your favorite? Be sure to let me know by painting on the side of your local city hall. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have divorce papers to file.
We really can't talk this out?